Thank you for joining us today on the Chant Hannah Show. And I have my guest co-host, Frank Stalter, with us today. And I also would like for everybody to please go to my channel, The Chant Hannah Show, and click subscribe. Today we have a very special show on Apports. Today, I introduce. The first person is Grant Cameron. I don't believe he actually needs an introduction, but Grant Cameron became involved in ufology in 1975 with personal sightings of an object which locally became known as Charlie Red Star. Grant has turned his research interests to the involvement and actions of the President of the United States in the UFO problem. One highlight his presidential UFO research was the chance to question Vice President Dick Cheney on his knowledge of the UFO subject. His research has yielded 1,000 pages of UFO documents from the Clinton administration. Grant is working on producing monographs for Dr. Walker, Wilbert Smith, the presidential involvement in the topic of psychic phenomena, and a monograph looking at a possible disclosure pattern to try and explain the many actions of the American government related to UFOs. During the last 50 years, he is also working on a detailed paper detailing the 64 reasons the government is covering up the ET presence. The books he's done, UFOs, MJ-12 and the Government, Tales of the Charlie Red Star. My next guest is Irena Scott. Dr. Scott is a great-great-grandniece of John Purdue. She has a PhD in physiology. Irena was on the MUFON board of directors and was an investigator for QFOS. She is also on the board of the SCU, the Scientific Coalition of Ufology. Books she's written: Sacred Corridors. The second one is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Roswell, Battelle. I'm sorry, it's Dr. J. Allen Hynek and UFO Cover-Ups. Rich Hoffman, our next guest, is a UFO researcher currently serving as a board member to the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, the Scientific Coalition of Ufology. Jeff Krause is the state director of MUFON of Southern California, president, CEO, MUFON of Los Angeles, state section director of MUFON Los Angeles, state section director of MUFON Tri-County, member of the MUFON START team, and a MUFON field investigator. Earl Gray. He's a chief field investigator of Southern California MUFON, and Shane Hurd. Shane has spent his career in the fields of civil engineering, GIS, and is a certified public manager. He is also a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network. As a member of the space race generation, he has been a lifelong sci-fi geek and a science nerd. He is a musician, amateur astronomer, horse owner, and enjoys a good bourbon every now and then. Frank Stalter is my co-host, and I would like him to give a little bit of his biography during the show.
I've never heard of him.
Right. And so I just want to bring up an interesting topic. Did I cover everybody there, by the way?
I think we got everybody, yeah.
Yeah, I got everybody, except for, I think, Jeff Krause's bird, who's going to be on the show today, and that's Monty. So welcome, everybody, onto the show. Thank you for being on the Chant Hannah Show today.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Greetings, Earthlings. Even you, Earl.
Nice to be here.
Grant, I wanted to get something out of the way regarding Joe Firmage and the National Space Council. Recently, you did a post regarding Joe Firmage claiming that he was the president of the National Space Council. Do you mind maybe going into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to go into it, or are you going to go into it?
Well, I'd love to hear a comment from you on it, if you don't mind.
Okay, as I explained a little bit earlier, there is no leaked document. March the 26th was the National Space Council meeting. I heard from somebody, it wasn't Joe Firmage, that he had been appointed. I really didn't realize what it was at that point. So for the month, I sat there, and then I suddenly heard from some of the people around Firmage that this was going to happen. There was also discussion about the lawsuit. The Kiviat lawsuit had to be settled. There was going to be this release. I knew about this a long time before, so I sort of alerted people. And all that basically happened was Joe Firmage posted a press release on his LinkedIn site. There is no leaked document. There's no conspiracy. He's got it on his LinkedIn site. You can still go there. The press release is still there. And he's making the claim that there's a new position that he's been appointed to. And he has posted 5 new documents after that sort of explain his thing. I'm actually having a meeting with another researcher tonight who talked to Joe yesterday. We really don't know what the heck he's talking about. He's explained it to me. He asked for a phone call. I had a video conference with Joe Firmage. He basically told me to back off, that my posting had caused, now what was the word he used? A dust up. And I said, fine, I will sort of back away from this thing. And then people started to leak other material, which I'm not too sure is disinformation, or it's always the way that this whole thing works is you always have 2 different stories that conflict with each other, so that you have camps fighting with each other. So there's been some material that was leaked to me, giving another explanation of what's going on. I've been told by certain people who probably know that you should leave this alone. But Joe is up to something. Joe has posted this stuff. He's got a lot of very high profile people who are following him. And I've followed all this stuff. I stated the lawsuit was going to end. It did end on the 25th. The press release was on the 23rd. There was a story that the Kiviat lawsuit had to be settled before they would make this announcement. So whatever Joe is up to, I'm not sure what Joe is up to, but there is no leaked document. It's on his LinkedIn site, and he has explained to a number of people, if you actually want, you can actually phone up Joe Firmage. He'll actually talk to you about it. He talked to me. He's talked to other researchers who have reached out and talked to him. And he's explained it doesn't make any sense to me what he's doing or what this deal is. But that's basically the story. It's on his LinkedIn site. There's no leaked document. There's no conspiracy. It's just a press release of something that Joe Firmage has put out. And I posted it, and knowing a month before that it was coming, I posted it when it went up. And basically that's all I've done is posted his press release.
Well, it must not be criminal regarding what he said, because if it was, there would be charges and we would know about it.
Well, why would it be criminal? I mean,
well, exactly. That's what people are saying, and I don't see how it is.
No, he's a guy who's spent many years, and I've heard various figures, $40 million, $20 million on this anti-gravity thing that he's working on. My interest in Joe Firmage is his download, and he had an experience in the 1990s where he was running this big multi-billion-dollar .com company and had this experience with a being in his room that basically the indication I got was it sort of gave him indications on how the inside of an atom worked. So that's my interest. I'm interested in experiencers. I'm interested in people who are getting downloads, who are getting material from outside the waking conscious mind. So that was my interest in Joe Firmage. And I only got dragged into this when I heard this rumor on the 26th of March that he had got this new position. So there's really nothing. Joe is still maintaining. He will talk to you. He will explain. If you go to his LinkedIn site, he's got 5 articles that explain what this is all about. And it doesn't make much sense to me, but that's basically where it's at. There's no conspiracy. Nobody broke the law. He's just a guy who spent a lot of money on this anti-gravity thing and has been working at this relentlessly. He's not in it for the money. But as you probably know, there's a lot of people who claim that they invested, they didn't make money. And I really don't have any sympathy for these people because it's like I played the penny stock market. And I know that if you invest in penny stocks or in free energy devices, get ready to lose your money. So that's basically where it's at.
Would it be fair to say this was a form of self-promotion in some indirect way by him?
No, he may be spinning what this is, but he is absolutely believes that he's got something. In fact, one of the postings I put was one of the websites that just went up, and you see the instruments. He's got this 1.0 device that he's selling, and the way he explained it to me is, I'm going to work on 0-point energy, and I'm not going to blow shit up. So he's basically opposing to the other idea that we're going to use this stuff for weapons. He has a very good, I think, view of this whole thing, that this should be used for mankind's benefit. And he firmly believes in what he's doing. He actually believes he is on the leading edge of this stuff, and he's just busy working at it. And he's basically on his own. There aren't that many people who are on his side or defending him, except for his investors. And at times I actually feel sorry for Joe, that he's sort of working at it as hard as he can. He has no money, and he's trying to do the best he can with this download experience he had in the 1990s.
Well, I think it's important to not, and you haven't done this. I don't know anybody personally that has done this, but I've seen it in public where they're actually bashing him and treating him like he's nothing. And I don't see what the point is in that. He is a person who has the right to be able to say what he wants. And if he thinks he's the president of the National Space Council, then, it's not hurting anybody.
And Grant, you've gotten some
ahead.
heat on this too. You've gotten
Yes,
some
we'd like
a
to
little bit
know.
of heat on this, and you're just passing along something from Firmage that's from Firmage. Hey, that's news.
Yeah, and as I said, I knew about it a month before, so I was hyping it before because I knew this was coming. I had seen an earlier press release, and it got delayed because of this Firmage lawsuit thing. That Firmage Kvyat ended up walking away from the lawsuit, and so we were following that story plus the story. When is this going to release? And I'm still listening. I'm still following the story. I'm still talking to. I would say I probably have 7 or 8 people sort of associated with this story that I'm still talking to. This story's not over yet. This is still a live story.
Right, and we're watching it very closely. I know this is a hot topic, Grant. Thank you for having addressed it. The entire UFO community is really interested, very acutely interested in finding out what the heck Joe Firmage is talking about. So as you said, all they have to do is go to his LinkedIn. I have gone to his LinkedIn. I've read all the comments underneath it. I've gone to Instagram, Twitter. I've gone to Facebook. I've read as much as I can. I did reach out to him. But, look, I think he's getting overwhelmed with all kinds of requests to talk about this topic. Frank, did you have any more questions about this topic? Or
Let's get on with the main task we're here
let's
for.
Do that.
I
wanted to cover Apports and teleportation. Grant, recently you were making comments about Apports, and I just wanted to read a quote that you made regarding that topic in a thread of a post. Now, there's a post run by a really wonderful person, and group, and her name is Roxana. And in her group, one of her really wonderful members, Melissa, did a post about teleportation, a story that occurred to them. And they reached out to Grant to find out a little bit more about that topic. In the thread of that post, Grant said, "It is especially important now as the more secular paradigm people are about to make the case that pieces are falling off flying saucers, and the military should finance research to build new aerial war machines based on the metal being found. More and more the line is, UFOs are going to be a lot less physical and much more spiritual than people think. And some people are not going to be too happy about the new world view." What does all of that mean, Grant?
Well, I should basically give you a background on how I got into this, and that is I follow experiencers. So I was at LAX with Ray Hernandez. We were waiting for an Uber, which took forever to get there. So Ray is talking to me about his various people that are around him, and he's talking about this one particular guy who Ray says is probably the top experiencer that he's met out of the 6,000 odd people that have filled out all the forms that they've got. And he started talking about these Apport things, and that this guy had this collection of these materials that were falling. You'd be in the house and these things would fall, and there were all sorts of different objects, whatever. And I'm thinking back and I'm going, this is kind of familiar. This is This happened in the days of the Stanford Research Institute when Uri Geller was there. I remember this story. So I linked the story together. Uri Geller goes out with Hal Puthoff and Edgar Mitchell, and they're at the restaurant, and Uri is eating ice cream, and he cuts his mouth on this piece of metal that's in the ice cream. And Edgar Mitchell looks at it and he says, "Where the heck did this come from? This is my pin." He had lost this pin in Houston, Texas years before. It was an Air Force pin or a Navy pin or something like that. And so they go back to the lab, and in the lab, then they're in the lab, and the back half of this pin falls in behind Hal Puthoff and Edgar Mitchell in a lab, and Uri Geller's in another room, and then later another piece fell. So I knew that there was this association, there was this connection. So I actually, at that point, I started to think, I wonder if the metal, because everybody's talking about this metal, and I've worked on this metal since. Back in the 1970s, I was working, the Canadian government had a lot of this metal. A lot of the stuff from the US was coming into Canada and was being given to the Canadians for analysis. And what you basically get is you get all these little tiny pieces. You don't get like a door off a flying saucer or something. You get these little tiny pieces that are like the size of a quarter that are appearing. And I know from working on these metals over the years that most of these pieces are pieces that fall when a flying saucer goes by or UFO, then suddenly they hear this noise and they see this piece of metal fall, they pick up the piece of metal. And I had gotten the impression, based upon what happened at SRI, what Ray was telling me, that this metal stuff is not going to be pieces off flying saucer. A flying saucer does not fly across the galaxy and then suddenly have pieces that are falling off it. And I give a lecture. It's called The Theory of Wow. It's a lecture I give, where I say that basically I'm coming to the conclusion that all of the UFO phenomena is just messaging. So whether it's crop circles, whether it's UFOs flying around with lights on them, or whether it's ground traces, the metal stuff is just messaging. They're dropping this stuff on purpose. And that's when you see the Apports stuff. That is, if you take a look at Apports, it happens in all sorts of things, with mediums, with Eastern mystical guys, gurus, all this kind of stuff. You see this stuff happening over and over again, where this material is coming you have materializations that come from another world. So things that appear that nobody has seen before, I call these materializations. Apports are things that are moved around, and you can see people who have worked on ghost, poltergeist type stuff. We'll talk about this all the time, stuff moving around in the house. And so what happened to me is, once I had this conversation with Ray, I got sort of really into this sort of thing. And it was at that point when I started looking around, and I'm going to this conference in Laughlin, Nevada, Paula Harris's conference. So what happens is you have these synchronistic events that lead me to say, this is an important subject. What happens is I'm Googling, I find Stanley Krippner's interview that was done where he's talking about the Apports, and he says, I had a bunch of these Apports from various psychics, and this guy's been, his whole life he's worked on these type of things, and all these Apports got stolen out of his house. So he said, I decided that I wanted to have the next set of Apports so that they wouldn't get stolen, so I sent them to a university. And guess where the university is? It's the university where I worked for 37 years. In Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, where 95% of the people in the United States would even know where Winnipeg is. And Stanley Krippner sends these Apports. So I'm into the Apport thing. And then I go to Laughlin, Nevada. And that's when it starts for me. Laughlin, Nevada, I have a guy, his name is Tony Bintz from England, who suddenly decides there's consciousness involved in UFOs. He looks it up. He comes across me, and he decides he's got to leave the UK for the first time in his life. He's got to go see Grant Cameron in Laughlin, Nevada. He's going across the world. He's very, very sick. He's had 3 experiences very, very near death. And he comes to Laughlin, Nevada to talk to me. And that's when he tells me the feather story. 8 incidents of feathers falling when they're asking for signs. And then the feather incidents start happening at Laughlin during the conference with the British people, with me, with my assistant in Tucson, Arizona, where we get a feather thing. So we have these like 12 incidents with feathers within a couple of weeks all happening. And I was just hooked. And I suddenly believed, yes, this I believe is a type of messaging. This is sort of an interaction with a higher form of consciousness. We can tap into this sort of thing. And when I started looking at all this sort of stuff, I found out it's very, very common. Ray Hernandez will say that 30% of all experiencers have apport experiences where stuff is moving around in the house, where stuff is materializing. And now when I do interviews, I did an interview 2 days ago, and I'll stop at this. I do an interview with this Dave Emmons guys, and he wants to talk to me about consciousness and about his UFO sightings and stuff. And it's like every experience, and I bring up the fact I said, Dave, did you ever have anything weird drop out of the sky or stuff move around in the house? And he said, yeah. Can I go to the next room and get the stuff? And he goes into the room and he comes back with all this stuff and he starts telling me these Apport stories of this material appearing, of this, a coin falling or into his car on the front the driver's side. And of course I ask him, and I already know what the answer is. It's like you can predict what's going to happen. I said, it was a heads up or heads down. He said, heads up. And that's the thing that happened is when I was in Laughlin, Nevada, I'm lecturing. So I add this Apport. I suddenly get religious about Apports. I put it in. Steve Mira comes up the very next lecture. Steve says, you stole my lecture. And he starts talking about Apports. I'd never heard about Apports a month before. I didn't even know what they were. And then the Navajo Rangers come up, and the Navajo Rangers start talking, and they say, we had these 64 coins, and they're doing all these paranormal events. 64 coins, all heads up. I go to leave the room. The guy that's at the front at the door says, can I talk to you? I got dimes. Dimes keep appearing all over the place. And I said, heads up or heads up, all heads up. How many? 40. And then he says, Bob, the guy used to run UFO Congress. He's got dimes too. And suddenly I'm inundated with these stories of these Apport things that seem to appear all the time. And it sort of fascinates me. But I think it's basically the same thing as a crop circle, as a ground trace, as a UFO flying around. To me, it's all messaging. It's like the Nimitz thing. It's like, why does the UFO drop from 80,000 feet down to the surface of the water in like a second or two? It's because they just want you, they're giving you a message. They're just trying to interest you. Why do they go under the water and make bubbles? They just want to get your attention. Why did they stay there for a week before the Nimitz came? They're just trying to get our attention. They're sending us messages. And the more I look at the UFO phenomena, the more I think it's all messaging.
Okay, so you're...
Yeah, I know Grant went into a lot of detail there, but
yes.
Just in general, Rich Hoffman, Dr. Scott, Shane Hurd, Earl Grey, what do you think about the general concept of ETs, UFOs, with the messaging? Anyone want to jump in here?
I wrote a story with a print person that suggested that some of the things, such as Roswell, might just be set up to, at certain times in human history, to affect things rather than an actual event. I mean, they talk about the Roswell debris.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's something that has been set up to influence people.
Yeah, you'll see that. You see that in the Diane Pasulka's book, where they go to this site, and I know where the site is, in this New Mexico site, and Tyler D. and James are there, and James calls it the gifting site. That's the idea, that this stuff may actually been given to us. The crashes may have been on purpose, that this is so that's why these guys, Tyler D is on the inside, and they're referring it to as a gifting site where all this material is given to us to help us. Yes.
I mean, I think that it's exactly that it's like Prometheus bringing fire to mankind, that's a messaging to show that you can survive this phase that we're in, where we're still warlike and we have the ability to blow ourselves up multiple times. But when we're dealing with this advanced civilization that is messaging us, I think maybe the message is that you can get past this and that you can do great things. They're definitely telling us something.
And two, I think it's been pretty obvious through most of the sightings that when they don't want to be seen, they're not seen. So when they are seen, it's pretty obvious that it's because they did want to be seen by someone at that time.
Purposeful. It's always purposeful.
Go ahead,
Nobody
Rich.
sees a UFO by accident. I keep on bumping into this. I don't think that anything's accidental. I don't think that they whoops, we crashed our spaceship,
Yeah.
They're
not out doing butterfly maneuvers for whimsical amusement amongst themselves. They're doing stuff to get our attention when they're seen in big instances like this.
This is. Let me jump in here for a second. I mean, I've been dying to chat on this. So, it's rather interesting. I don't profess to understand intellectual capabilities of any alien life form. Like, let me clarify that up front. I don't know that they're intense. We as humans tend to want to be able to put our own spin on it and try to make it make sense. It's pretty clear that, if you want to look at it for something like, wanting to get our attention, you might want to take the nuke cases as being a primary example of trying to get our attention, right? Okay. But I mean, here's where I struggle. Okay. Why do I want to drop a piece of metal off of a craft to be able to make a message? What does the message say? And then at the same time, why don't I just hand a piece of metal to an abductee and drop it off and leave it with them and say, here's my whatever this purpose is?
Perhaps those are just the Boeing test models.
Yeah. So I just don't, I have great difficulty with that. In the MUFON cases that I investigated, I went through the whole database practically, looking for all different kinds of things because we struggled with being able to try to find, is paranormal activity involved in cases? And a lot of times it's, not the case. It's like an object in the sky, that it's there, it's gone,
Well, you did, Rich, you did seem to suggest perhaps you saw a pattern of behavior, though. Maybe not exactly the phenomenon we're talking about, but you did suggest that, at least it seemed to me. If I'm wrong, clear me up here.
A pattern of behavior.
You talked about the nuke sites.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to say, short of the nuke sites, which was pretty doggone, that does suggest something. Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is dropping a piece of slag or metal or some other kind of an object or making keys disappear out of a room or whatever like that. To me, I struggle with that. And I don't know that I ascribe that even necessarily in a house or something like that to being a UFO. I might think that there might be a poltergeist or some other kind of phenomena going on there, but I don't see much in the way of evidence from the record that we've got, where there's a tremendous amount of this kind of like messaging going on in the UFO reports that we get. And I used to look at like thousands of these cases, seemingly over a period of time with the Science and Review Board. And I've not really had anything. I have had one case where I had an individual in southern Alabama that was claiming that keys were being moved around or appearing and disappearing and that type of thing. And it happened to coincide with a UFO report. But again, I go back to, if we're not looking at cases that have been investigated, number one, and found to be unknowns, and then we look at some of the behavior and then try to ascribe our understanding to it. We struggle with mixing it in with all different kinds of other naturally IFO cases, which are the vast majority of the cases. And so I'm a little bit questioning that.
So what are you proposing?
Let me jump back in and
falling off.
I'm sorry, what?
Well, how do you explain the metals? Are you proposing the pieces are falling off flying saucers after they've flown across the galaxy?
Well, I'm not sure that they're coming off of the flying saucers, and I wouldn't even jump to saying that they're, that they're even connected. They might be. In the case of crashes, if you want to look at crashes, you can find debris. But I don't know. I'm not going to ascribe my understanding and say that I'm going to jump to a piece of metal falling off of it and saying that it's a message. What the hell's the message? That they have some sort of problems and that they're wanting to dump metal? I mean, that's just that's speculation out the bippy. I'm looking for something that makes sense, and yeah, we have a problem with that because again, we don't understand alien intent. I don't understand any alien.
If it's alien.
Well, if it is alien, yeah, and there's a whole lot of other explanations for something that's in the sky. I mean, just you could take a look at the Bentwaters case and say that might be a time machine. And that might be us from the future. Yeah. So I'm not willing to say that it's ET giving us a message at all.
Well, let me. Go ahead, Grant. I'm sorry.
No, I just say we got to go to the evidence. The evidence is 30% of all experiences, whether you've seen it or not. The free survey, which I think is the best evidence we've got, is 30% of all of them are claiming there's Apport type material. And if you start looking in across all the other paranormal phenomena, and it's all going to be the same thing. It's all paranormal phenomena is going to basically be consciousness based, and you start finding it in mediums. You find it all over the place. This I thought Apport stuff was just UFO stuff, and you find out it's all over the place. It's very, very common. It's way more common than you think it is.
Yeah, and I'm not ascribing that every abduction case is also alien either. And so, is there an aspect of paranormal? I mean, parapsychology. Is there some sort of aspect of poltergeist phenomena that's creating this? I'm not jumping to the fact that it has to be UFO, and I'm not seeing that in UFO cases.
90% of UFO, according to the free survey, over 90% say there's paranormal phenomena. 70% have seen ghosts. There's 37% have had near-death experiences. You just go through the stats and you see this paranormal.
I'm not saying stuff. I don't necessarily see that the UFO phenomena that we see are connected to even alien abduction cases. Okay. Let me clarify that. That correlation has yet to be proven. There's very little, and there's few cases on record where you have something that indicates that something did happen. I'm not saying all of them, but I'm saying that there are very few cases where there's physical evidence and enough evidence to support even that that's being connected to a UFO event.
It may not even be physical. So you're setting guidelines. It has to be physical. We have to be able to touch it and feel it and smell it and stuff. And it may not be physical at all.
I'm saying that that's how science works. Okay.
But that's you're just putting the borders. You're saying unless it fits into science, it doesn't believe you can't exist. So that's where we are. Science won't accept this. It won't do it because you've got to play by our game. It's like the Roman Catholic Church.
I happen to subscribe to the fact that science gets us a little bit further down the road in our understanding of the universe. And so that's where I'm coming from. Speculating is not going to get us anywhere. And I hear you speculating on what this might be or the intent or whatever else is going on.
That's the way it works. You get a hypothesis, you make observations, you make conclusions, you make a new hypothesis. It doesn't say it has to be physical. That's not in the scientific method.
I'm sorry, but also speculating like we're doing is just not getting there either.
Well, let me jump in here, and again, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, Rich, but there have been a lot of UFO cases, and we know this for a fact, where people see UFOs at night and they are lit up, they have lights on them. The question's been asked a lot. If you're an advanced extraterrestrial craft, what do you need lights on your vehicle for? And I would hypothesize, shall we say, that the reason is to be recognized, the same sort of thing that is being mentioned in connection with the Apports. Let me ask you this, Rich. You've looked at a lot of cases over the years. How often are they sightings at night with lights on them? Is this This is pretty common, I would have to assume.
So let me get to the lights, okay? If you take a look at the early days of flying saucers and various other things, you would basically say that you would see that the object was lit. Okay, the object had possibly a field around it, or if we're going to speculate, it had some sort of like field around it. And of course, that's what we're saying, even with a tic tac or various other things. And where that atmosphere is likely meeting our atmosphere, their whatever their shield or whatever you want to call it is interacting with it. It's creating it to become lit up. Much like the same thing you see with a meteor going through the gas. Where a gas is ignited and a certain color of that happens. If you look at Jim McCampbell's work, you find out that, it's basically they'll go through even color changes, even sometimes. Yeah,
and you can tell what the makeup of the meteorite is by the color.
And then we get into the fact that lights, if we take a look at it, we eliminate probably the ones that are possibly aircraft or various other kinds of like things in the sky that we don't understand. You don't see like rotating lights like the typical thing that you see on science fiction days. You see maybe that there might be some lights on the triangles that we're starting to connect with. And that's likely our craft, as far as I'm concerned, and the way I've been seeing. But anyway, I don't really necessarily see that these rotating lights like we see in science fiction things are necessarily alien craft either, or even that light. I mean, they don't need lights. They don't need, as you pointed out, they can outmaneuver us, and they don't need lights whatsoever, right?
Right. They don't need them, but there are cases where they do exist. You're saying that you think, well, most UFO cases, of course, aren't ET, but there's. Let me put it to you this way: are there some good cases you're aware of that are lighted UFOs at night that you think we can't explain this?
Well, I mean, let's take the Bentwaters case. The Bentwaters case, at the bottom underneath it had some sort of a bluish kind of like light, if you would. Okay, well, but then if you take a look at the Peniston's statement about the ones and zeros, then you get to believe that it's us from the future. So that would explain why that might have lights on it, I guess, or something to that extent. But then you take a look at other cases, and going back to the sightings at night, yeah, generally it's easier for people to see a light on a dark background than it is for them to see a dark object on a light background. And so we get more reports at night because basically people are also off of work and outdoors looking up in the sky, or they see something readily because it's a light on a whatever, And so we will get, we'll get those reports more frequently than we do on the daytime sightings. So I don't know if that helps or not, but I mean,
yeah. No, I appreciate it. I do.
What if
I just go ahead if you don't mind finishing that, Rich, and then I have a question for you.
No, I was just to say that I'm not saying all. Okay, I'm trying to be very careful in saying that there's when we go through the cases and we actually read the cases, and we've investigated a lot over 55 years. I mean, I've been out in fields and everything else looking at objects. A lot of times the light that they say is the object, it's glowing, or there's some sort of a thing around the object that's glowing. It's only recently that we're starting to get on these cases where you might say that the triangular cases, if you would, have some sort of 3 lights on them. And then you have to question whether or not they're looking at 3 separate objects or whether they're looking at a solid object. So the mind and the human is tries to interpret that in their brain, and they don't necessarily always get it accurate either. And the same goes with even abductees or claims of abduction, where we have people, experiencers, telling their story, and they're doing it from the best of their ability. And we know that the human mind is not that all accurate either. At the same time, we see that there is some sort of pattern because everybody seems to be in the abduction side telling almost very much a similar story. So I'm not saying that there isn't something going on, but I don't necessarily see yet the proven correlation between that and, let's say, the observations of little beings that scampered back on board their craft that didn't want to be seen throughout the UFO history. There's a lot of those. And then there's a lot of contactees who they believe that they saw somebody from the planet Venus. And they talked with them, and they went aboard, and they took them aboard. How do you go and figure that one out and understand it rationally? And you can't. So then you start to go off and you start speculating about other things. It's consciousness. It's this or it's that. But we don't have any proof. We need proof. And science works on the basis of giving evidence.
Well, Rich, you
wait,
can.
Hold on, Frank.
Okay.
Wait, Frank, I want to bring this up because Frank's been bringing up very, very good questions. And hold on to that, Frank, because I know you have a good question to ask. Rich, I think the only thing I would like to bring to your attention is when you say we don't have any proof, I don't know that they use that very much in science, but whether they do or not, what I wanted to bring to your attention is it's important for us to speculate and ask questions because that's a basis, a fundamental principle of science. And there's no way to actually get anywhere in science unless we speculate, and I use that term loosely. One example is Einstein. He did thought exercises in his head to imagine and ruminate over things that could be possible. Now, we wouldn't have the general theory of relativity without his having had the benefit of stepping outside the paradigm he was surrounded by and the culture he was surrounded by regarding science and society, and then moving forward in a courageous manner to ask questions. Then he wrote his thesis regarding general theory of relativity, and then other important scientific papers. Now, it's not just Einstein, it's really, it's many other mental giants, both right now and in history, that have gotten us to the point where we are regarding science. So it's important for us to talk about things like this. Now, with regards to the science of teleportation, it's my understanding that there's a gentleman called, his name is Eric W. Davis. And there was a study called the Teleportation Physics Study, approved for public release by the Air Force Research Laboratory, Air Force Material Command, Air Force Base. I have that. I'll send a link into the chat room in just a second. This was a teleportation physics study. The abstract says the study was tasked with the purpose of collecting information describing the teleportation of material objects, providing a description of teleportation as it occurs in physics, its theoretical and experimental status, and a projection of potential applications. The study also consisted of a search for teleportation phenomena occurring naturally or under lab conditions that can be assembled into a model describing the conditions required to accomplish the transfer of objects. I'm going to read just a little bit more. This included a review and documentation of quantum teleportation, its theoretical basis, technological development, and its potential applications. The characteristics of teleportation were defined and physical theories were evaluated in terms of their ability to completely describe the phenomena. Contemporary physics, as well as theories, and presently challenge the current physics paradigm, were investigated, something you and I are talking about right now. The author identified and proposed two unique physics models for teleportation that are based on the manipulation of either the general relativistic space-time metric or the space-time vacuum electromagnetic zero-point fluctuations parameters, naturally occurring anomalous teleportation phenomena that were previously studied by the United States and foreign governments were also documented in the study and are reviewed in the report. The author proposes an additional model for the teleportation that is based on a combination of the experimental results from the previous government studies and an advanced
Jan, you're breaking up.
Uh-oh.
numerous recommendations. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, numerous recommendations outlining proposals for further theoretical and experimental studies are given in the report. The report also includes an extensive teleportation bibliography. It sounds like they're using science to study teleportation there. Grant and Rich, what are your comments on that? Either one of you, if you don't mind jumping in. And before you do, I would like to say that according to the research I've done, teleportation relies on the study of it relies on the uncertainty principle and quantum entanglement phenomenon. Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I'll jump in and just...
what I'm pointing out is that there is a scientific study right there by the United States military studying teleportation.
So Edwards Air Force Base is where they were doing the study,
Right,
I
thank
believe.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, I mean, okay, obviously, let's get down to, we're going to get into quantum entanglement. You know, I mean, we don't understand the universe, okay? We really don't. I mean, we don't understand, we're starting to understand more and more about the quantum world, but we have so much yet to learn. And yeah, the fact that you can have one particle here and somewhere else in the universe, you do a spin and that spin changes and alters instantaneous. Tells you that there's something very instantaneous going on, but we don't understand.
1,200 kilometers is the record.
So bottom line is, you know, getting down to the energy packets, if you would, on the quantum level, there's something going on there, but we don't really understand yet what that is. And is that what you'd call teleportation? I don't know that I would go there. I think that teleportation is definitely being looked at. It's being explored by science. They are trying to move particles or quantum level kind of particles around. But that's a holistically different thing than me taking, Chant and moving her from where she's at right now and having her reappear over here with me. And expecting that I'm going to get all of those quantum particles that she's got in her body all rearranged and put back is going to take a hell of a lot of. Anyway, that being said, we just don't know a lot. I mean, we're still infants, I think, in a lot of our science.
And for the record, Chan is 2,000 miles away from me right now, and that's close enough. Thank you very much.
That's okay. So, did anybody have a personal teleportation story? I think I heard that Jeff might. Is that correct, or is that about did your bird have one? So Jeff Krause,
no response from Jeff. I do know we had brought up Rendlesham before, and John Burroughs says he had one related to that case. So there's that. Uri Geller discussed his experience on our show when he was with us about a month ago. So they do come up once in a while, now and again. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
One might view some of the UFOs themselves as teleported too, maybe from other planets or someplace else, as something that's spying on us or teleported some way.
Good thought.
And if you look at experiencers, they basically talk about this all the time. Nobody remembers being taken on the ship. They were talking about going through walls, through windows. Part of the reason I was following Firmage was because this rumored story that they're working on portal technology. We heard about the portal stuff at Skinwalker Ranch. This idea that you can move from one place to another instantaneously seems to be being talked about by an awful lot of people. This is not some sort of speculation. People are reporting this. And I think that's where you go, because then you get into the whole idea that consciousness may be primary, and that the idea that you have physical stuff is an illusion, that it's much more basic. And I can just give you the one example of Chris Bledsoe talking to me. I've got 50 people who have flown the ship, and every single one is like a cue card. You just say to them, how do you fly a ship? And they all say, you do it with your mind. And Chris Bledsoe told me, I said, okay, explain it. He went step by step, exactly how it worked. And he told me, he said, the way it works is you look out, if you're looking out the front window of the craft and you see a cloud, you just say, I'd like to go to the cloud. And suddenly the cloud is right there. And I've heard this numerous times where the idea that you're going to move from place to place is almost instantaneous. And that's why I'm so interested in the whole idea of the portal thing. When you get people talking about this type of stuff, that we live in a sort of an illusionary world where we think that we're flying across. These guys have got big, huge ships and they're flying across time and space. I can almost guarantee you, if this is for real, they are popping in and popping out. They are not flying across the universe. You would need huge amounts of food. And when you start looking at the beings and you start seeing the description that they come out of balls of light and turn into aliens, or they go from aliens into balls of light, then you start looking at it and you're saying this whole idea that a lot of quantum physicists, that when they first started, says consciousness is primary. You cannot get behind consciousness. That is where I think you got to go. I think you got to drop this physical notion of the universe and realize it may be a little more complex than little nuts and bolts that makes up a random universe.
Grant, or if it's simpler than that, they've got a local base.
But they still have to get here at some point. They still have to.
Understood.
And we have the United Space Program can't even get to they got to use the Russians to get to the space station.
Understood.
So we're got a long way away. And the idea that you're going to spend, many light years going to another star system, it's almost more conceivable that they have found some way to bypass through, warp in space time or whatever it is.
A traversable wormhole, something along those lines.
Whatever. That it's going to be much more. I can almost bet my farm that I don't have that they ain't flying here in big spaceships. They've got some other way to get here.
So UFOs and consciousness is a hot topic. Go ahead, Rich. You were going to say something. I think I heard you. Please talk.
We talked at the internet at our conference about this with interstellar travel, and basically the concept there would be that if you had a group of people that are alien race, if you would, you would basically be in the concept of more like nomadic, if you would. You'd be traveling in large groups to a given location, and then you would settle at that location. And then you would move from that location off into other areas. And you could move and do with the interstellar travel. We basically had Dr. Kevin Knuth, who was talking about this in his presentation, where you could probably get, if you're traveling near light speeds, you could conceivably be over on the other side of the universe in a very short order. But again, you'd want to travel in nomadic groups and settle. Well, if you look at the UFO history, if you want to look at, what has been written from and studied by like Wonders in the Sky that Jacques Vallée and Chris Aubeck did, I mean, you find out that they've been here for a very, very long time. If you want to sit in written records. So it's very conceivable that they've been here all along, and they don't have to make these routine trips back and forth. And in fact, it would just be logical you'd settle underneath the water. I mean, if you want to get into speculating, and we seem to
yeah. Let's get into it.
we seem to be having a lot of objects coming in and out of water. That's been reported quite frequently. We have the Navy encounters that are going on, of course. But I mean, that's one of those other large patterns you see in UFO reports, is that there's a water somewhat connected to it. And so, I mean, they don't have to be coming from outer space. They can be here, and they could have been here all along. In fact, one argues that in 1945 and 46, when we're starting to detonate nukes, why wouldn't they start being a little bit concerned and popping up and wanting to stop us? And then why the focus on the nukes? Well, maybe that's wanting to stop them in the silos and send a message. So there you go.
Yep.
There's your message being sent.
Yep. And let me speculate a little bit, and it could be that, or it could be they like playing chase games with advanced military aircraft. And when you go to look for a pickup basketball game, you don't hang around the pond. You hang around someplace where an advanced military aircraft is likely to play that chase game with you.
Yep. I think that they've had a chance to give a lot of messages, and it's interesting that, if you want to give us a message or something of that nature, just hand it to an abductee that you got and have them go back. But instead of taking their books away like they did with Betty and Barney Hill, or Betty Hill, when she was wanting to take the book with her, give us a message and make it very, very clear. I mean, why not?
That's an American concept, though. We go to Iraq. We go to Iraq to bring them freedom, democracy, Jesus, McDonald's. They're not here to do our homework for us. It's an indirect thing. The same way the government is doing the disclosure thing. It's an indirect thing where they make you figure it out. It's not that they're going to come here and hand us the free energy toys that we're going to, speed up the destruction of the planet. It's basically, that's why I say it's messaging, but it's non-interference, where they're basically sending these indirect messages. They're never going to land, and I don't think the government is ever going to fully disclose. It's this indirect thing with the breadcrumbs. It's always been that way, and it's from the bottom up. It's not from the top down.
Well, we have landings, whether we want to say that we haven't or not. I mean, there are cases where there are landings. So to say that they don't land is not accurate in terms of reports.
But they don't stay on the ground. They just stay long enough. And when Betty asks for the book, they don't give you the book. They don't allow you to grab anything and take it out of there. They don't allow you any evidence. That's what they want. They want this sort of questionable thing where everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. If they wanted to land on the White House lawn and give us the answers, they could do it. They're not doing it. They are covering up the same as the government is covering up for a particular reason.
I don't know how you would know what they're doing. Anyway, I mean, it's like, why are they covering it up? What's the purpose of that?
Well, that's speculation. Who knows why they're covering it up?
Oh, that's
right. The fact is that they're covering it up. They could land on the White House lawn. They have not landed on the White House lawn. That is as obvious as can be.
But saying that it's covered up is just as equally speculating and making some sort of crazy inferences. As far as I'm concerned, why would I say that how would I know that they're covering it up?
Because they're not staying on the White House lawn. If they wanted to disclose what they were doing, they would land on the White House lawn. They have not done that.
I'm well aware that they haven't done that. My point is that they've allegedly been around the planet on every aspect of this continent. Obviously they don't want to say why they're here, but they give us little clues. Yes, nuclear silos and various other kinds of messages. I don't disagree with that. I just say that it's like these messages are so innocuous, and we're just trying to interpret them, and we're using our own. It's like me understanding what a dog thinks. I mean, how do I know what a dog thinks? I mean, I can't even conceive of that. And then plus, if I've got an intellect that could travel from the other side of the galaxy or whatever, how would I claim to even understand that alien intellect at all? And yes, it would look like magic. It would probably, it would be something that would be absolutely incredible. And that's what we're finding out. But I don't see a piece of metal popping off of something as being a message. And that's what I guess I'm trying to say.
Well, how do you explain the metal then? Are you saying there is no metal?
I don't.
This is illusion, or how are you explaining it?
I don't know how to explain it. In fact, we don't know enough about the craft themselves because we keep focusing on every other thing, distracting away from what the actual objects are. And we get involved in all these other dramas that go on in ufology, and we don't even focus on what the objects are doing.
There are dozens of pieces of metal. How do you explain all these pieces of metal?
I don't know. And I haven't said that I investigated the case, and I haven't said that that we haven't tested the metal and found out that a lot of the metals that I'm aware of that have been tested have not been shown to be anything out of a way of the earth. I mean, show me.
But if you haven't investigated, how would you know that?
What I'm saying is that other people have, and I've read those documents, and I've read that kind of literature.
And you have the Valet one where he says the mess up in the isotopes. Why would these? Where are the metals coming from? Where are these little pieces? I have the one that I found at the University of Arizona in the McDonald collection that was taken to NASA for analysis. 1939, comes flying out of the sky. It's like a spike that ends up in the guy's garden. He digs it out. He gives it to his daughter in 1967. She takes it to the lab in Tucson, Arizona. It's 99% metal. It is totally, nobody's ever come to an explanation for that. So I'm just saying there's a lot of these materials, piles, probably 5 dozen of these things. And I'm just saying, where is all this metal coming from?
Okay, well, that's you're entitled to say that. I mean, black rocks are metal too that fell out of the sky, and they're called, asteroid meteors and various other things. We didn't know what they were, but we don't ascribe them to being alien. We don't ascribe them to being even connected to UFOs. We see frogs falling out of the sky. I mean, we see all kinds of things falling out of the sky. Fish fall out of the sky. Do we want to call those and connect them to UFOs because we see a fish falling out or a toad? No.
Okay, so how would you explain that? If a fish falls out of the sky, what are you going to say it is?
Well,
it means something. It means something is wrong with our physical paradigm.
We haven't looked at the fact that there might have been a tornado or a water spout over there, spitting them up and projecting them across and landing somewhere else. Just like we don't look at the fact that there might be other kinds of explanations, natural explanations for a lot of things. We jump to the fact that it's alien very easily because we hear a boom in the sky and want to ascribe it to something like a UFO. And it's.
Well, what I'm saying is it's not alien. I'm saying Apports, this type of stuff is across all paradigms. It's in mediumship. It's in all sorts of stuff. It's not just UFO. This is very common in the world of the paranormal. If you take a look at Michael Talbot, who wrote the book, the Holographic Universe, he talks about as a child, his father going up on the roof and shoveling gravel off the roof. This stuff was happening with him. And this is not uncommon. This is not just UFO. It is a characteristic of the paranormal consciousness world where these paranormal things happen. And Apports are almost in every case a part of this phenomenon. It seems to be part of the structure of the universe rather than being an alien or a spirit or something like that.
Hey, Chant and Frank, this is Michael, and I think I have a question that I'd like to address to Grant, if I could, that we haven't talked about regarding these Apports, and that's basically the experiencer themselves being involved in this whole issue of Apports appearing out of the middle of nowhere, and it kind of kicks in, I believe, with the Kit Green experiments that they're doing with brain scans of experiencers, and I'm wondering if Grant can actually maybe tie those two together. The fact that these experiencers might be presupposed to experience these Apports, possibly.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm finding like now, because I've never really asked experiencers about this. Now I'm starting to ask, and almost every single time they talk about this kind of stuff. So the experiencers, it depends what your worldview is. I mean, if you have a worldview that it's a random, meaningless universe, well, then really nothing means anything. But if you get into the idea that it may be a reincarnation world, that we live more than once, well, then you start looking at people like the Moody Blues, who said that they remembered before they were born that they were going to be musicians, and that a lot of people who have pre-birth experiences where they believe that they remember before they were born. And it gets to be a world where it's much more complex than we think it is. Same as the abduction phenomenon. Is it a random phenomena? Is this soul contract? Are people agreeing to this kind of stuff? And the Apport phenomena is just a part of a lot of experiencers' lives. When you start asking, Chris Bledsoe is probably the most famous one. I mean, and I didn't even remember till I saw these Apports. And I remember Chris giving me this marble. And I was there in 2013 when this bizarre experience happened with the dog. And I remember him showing me these marbles. He said, look, I'm finding these marbles all over the place. And they were different sizes and stuff. And he gave me a marble in 2013. It wasn't until after this Apport stuff started, I go, oh, Chris gave me one of these things. It's the same story. It's like, it's all over the place. It is just so common. I cannot believe, having not asked this question to experiencers, how common this experience of stuff moving around, of, the feathers, the thing that we had, it wasn't even metal. It was these bizarre feather experiences where it was documented, where we had like a dozen witnesses and a dozen events, and you see all this stuff tying together. And I would say that the world is going to be a lot less random than people think it is. People think it's just everything is happening accidental. We're like a cork that's going down a stream and being influenced by stuff. And I would say when it comes down to it, we're going to be a lot more in control of what's going around us than we actually think, that our mind is controlling even the beings. If you take a look at the beings, there are not like three different types of beings. When I look at grays, people start describing grays, and then I say, describe exactly what the gray looked like. You start realizing that every single gray is different. People are describing different beings. It's almost like people, like snowflakes, like these sort of things, that pattern of the universe, that no two aliens are the same, and that people are. The last guy, this one I'm going to put on the YouTube is going up shortly. This guy from Israel. And he talks about the fact that we actually are a big part of what type of alien that we see. And so you get into this sort of idea that that's what the aliens told him, or where you get a lot of people, Shirley Wilde is one, who had this being Da. She said to Da, are you actually an alien? And he said, no, I'm not. And you get people will ask these questions, and you start realizing that this is just projections. It's the old idea about if a alien turns into a ball of light and then disappears, or if it comes out of a ball of light, is it an alien or is it a ball of light? And if it's a ball of light, does it eat bacon, eggs, toast, and coffee in the morning? The more you look at the phenomena, the less physical the phenomena starts to look.
This is Earl. So, I find it strange that every single supposed ET encounter that people have, that they're always bipedal with a head, 2 arms, 2 legs. And sometimes I think that perhaps this is that they appear this way in order to comfort us, or to make it so that there's not quite as much ontological shock involved when we meet one of these beings. I think that, who knows what they actually look like. I wonder if anybody's ever actually seen what our visitors actually look like, or whether you even could. We may be talking energy beings. If we're talking balls of light, that's it's kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi showing up, in Star Wars after he was, dead. It's a ball of light, it's more in tune with a spirit being or something. And so I wonder, if anybody's actually ever seen what our visitors actually look like.
Yeah, a lot of them go back to this ball of light thing, but that's one of the reasons why the modern science has had such a hard time with the alien thing, is because we believe it's a random universe where everything happens by accident. And then you say, well, how could you possibly have all these, rolling 12 billion double sixes in a row to create a human being. And then you say, well, it happened once, get used to it. But then if somebody says, oh, there's another one that looks exactly like us, you say, well, no, it's random. You couldn't possibly have the same accident happen twice on another part of the galaxy. And so that's why there's been this backlash against aliens that look like us. But what I would say is if there's oxygen in this part of the universe, there's oxygen over there. If there's DNA here, there's DNA there. If there's stars here, there's stars there. It's a pattern of the universe. And the world is not random, meaningless. It's self-organizing. The universe is life. It's self-organizing. And what happens here will happen in other places in the universe as well.
Panspermia could,
But that was the explanation they used to try to get out of it, to try to explain away the fact that these aliens look like us. And I asked the guy who has the big, I can't remember his name, he has the big humanoid catalog, 20,000. I said to him, so how many actual alien types are there? And he said, I haven't really counted, but it's got to be over 1,000. So you've got this random, meaningless accident that took 13 billion years, that all these chances, and then 1,000 times it all comes out the same, which would tend to indicate that it's self-organizing, that the pattern will happen no matter where you are in the universe. If you get the thing going, it's going to end up being bipedal and looking basically the same as stars will look the same in on the other side of the universe as they look here, or the oxygen, or everything is going to be duplicated all through the universe. It's following the same self-organizing pattern.
Well, some of it looks artificial, though. I mean, like they'll report like beings that look like humans, but they're made out of little balls of light, and little balls of light can fly apart, or they can go together and look like a human. Or there's ones that seem to be force fields, some you can see through, and all kinds of things, like they're imitating people.
Yeah. And you get the thing where people are being moved, like people are being moved onto the ship. They will describe the fact that it's not like they're physical anymore. They sort of are teleported there, or they are moved through the wall, or there's something beyond the physical world that when you start listening to these experiencers talk about how they went onto the ship, you start realizing we're missing something here. And if we can figure out what that is, we can actually advance beyond what we have right now. Because if we can continue to believe what we have right now, we're not going to advance. The only way you advance is to look at the things that don't make any sense, and that will explain something that's new that will move you to the next step.
I have a question for the panel, and that is, does the topic of teleportation, does that violate any laws of physics? Rich, I'd like to start with you on that, and then hear from everybody else.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, look, I mean, we all know that the laws of physics are being broken. I mean, if you look at the Tic Tac object, that alone right there, it's breaking laws of physics. So I think that it's safe to say that we haven't learned all the physics, that we haven't learned all the science yet, and so teleportation or any kind of like things like that might be happening, we just don't know, and it's going to take a while before science will catch up with it anyway. To be honest with you, I think that going back to your thought process, and with Einstein, yes, he used thought experiments to be able to do things. So we speculate. Yeah, we do speculate, but I don't jump to conclusions too wild, like obviously that they're all from the planet Zeta Reticuli or something of that nature. I'm looking for something a little bit more substantial than that I can actually put into a hypothesis and actually begin to look at and test. We're starting to do experiments with that in the physics world. We're starting to understand that that there's some kind of communication between two particles at a distance. And that's really spooky to us because we don't see anything between it, but yet we don't see a lot of things because the entire electromagnetic spectrum goes on infinitely in either side, in front of or in back of the visible range. So we just don't know what we don't know and what we haven't found out yet. And I think that just more exploration and needs to be done. And I think we need to get beyond the visible, if you would, and spend a little time in these other parts of the spectrum. We might learn a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone else want to grab that?
Well,
that question?
there's like prosaically, there's evidence that lightning bolts can go through walls and things like that. And I think scientific evidence for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, William Corliss has documented a tremendous number of excellent cases of that in his very well-defined books that he's put together, where science doesn't really understand a lot of that phenomena. It's like the balls of light that we're seeing over here about an hour away from me that I'm investigating. I mean, those, and by the way, I'll go back to talking about the fact that when I was doing the investigation on these balls of light, if you would, and they're about 8 foot in diameter. There's no being on the inside of them, but I mean, bottom line is that they range from 2 feet to 4 feet to 8 feet, depending upon what time of year you look at them. And their chemical composition is made up of largely oxygen, nitrogen. We see sulfur, we see iron, we see either scandium or yttrium in it as a chemical. And so we know it's a chemical process. And one of the witnesses over there happened to be saying that he was in Vietnam, and he apparently had some sort of equipment and actually was doing some tests, and they found that sulfur was a common ingredient in a lot of those things in Vietnam. And so, you know, and if you think about all the bombs that were dropped and the various gases that were used, and just in a swampy area, and all that wonderful stuff mixing together as a big stew, a lot of the things that we're seeing in Vietnam could be readily explained as being that natural phenomena, like Hessdalen, like, you know, the Brown Mountain Lights, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, there are a lot of these kinds of things out there that are often seen, and they glow, and they are misinterpreted as being UFOs.
When it comes to teleportation, I think you got to sort of realize you're bringing a lot of baggage with that description. You have other things that I think might better describe it. And as I was mentioning, the portal thing, or even if you look at remote viewing with the, if you look at Jimmy Carter's diary, Jimmy Carter talks about the most amazing thing he saw his entire time as president was when these two remote viewers picked off this Tupolev 22 intelligence platform plane that the Russians were using that had crashed in northern Africa, and they had one at SRI and one at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base that both identified this plane in the jungle in this river with the tail sticking up. And then they were trying to find it with the satellites. They couldn't find it. But then once they identified where this was, these two remote viewers, they picked it up, and within an hour, they had this thing. Jimmy Carter said it was the most amazing thing. When you start looking at that kind of stuff, where people are able to use their mind and move around, you realize that's where you're getting into this sort of teleportation thing, that we've got we're making mistakes. It's not so much that it's something we got to add. We got to get rid of a lot of the garbage that we believe in order to realize how this is going to work and move to the next step. Remote viewing shows clearly that our idea of the physical universe is not totally correct.
And just to jump in here with a little plug for my show, we are going to do some live remote viewing. We want to set up the protocols, and I would invite anyone to help us brainstorm with that, or appear and try their hand at some live remote viewing, where we are going to do that and try to see if we can make it work in a live fashion. And really, we want to get those protocols really tight. So I'd appreciate anyone's feedback on that if you want to give it to me later or now.
I'll just point out that even if you look at what Joe McMoneagle, who was one of the most successful remote viewers, I think, an incredible guy. I mean, what he flat out tells you is not everybody is accurate in terms of what they remote view, and that there's only a small number of those people that are actually what he called, I guess, the ones that are, he had a term for it. I don't remember now what it was, but so again, I go back to the fact that we try to interpret that, and we look at it, and I met with Hal Puthoff when he was at our conference, and we asked him that point blank, can we use remote viewing to be able to help us understand it? He said no, it's too imprecise. So I go with that. I go with what Hal says, because he's been around a lot longer than I have.
Well, we're gonna try to make it as complicated as possible. We're gonna use random number generators to select independent image target databases, and we're gonna try to put as many controls in there as possible. and we're going to give this thing a whirl probably before the end of the month. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We'll see what happens. It'll be an experiment, live on the
Russell
air.
Targ on. Get Russell Targ. He made $250,000 in the silver future market. He can play your little game. So
there you go. Well, we'll see what we can do.
Targ is good. This is Earl. So we were talking about the teleportation and the phenomenon, whether science allows for it. And the more I find, the more cases that I do and the more I learn about UFOs, I see UFOs as large objects that act like the very smallest objects. Now you may think about them in a nuts and bolts fashion, but, it's just science makes up nonsense words like wavicle to explain similar phenomenon of very...
Earl?
Uh-oh.
Earl.
You wind up disturbing the universe just by looking at the process. Yes, Frank.
Oh, you broke up a little bit. Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep. Yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
Did you hear most of what I said?
Most of it, yeah, but we missed a bit.
Okay, well, UFOs act like they're large objects that act like the smallest objects. That they kind of manifest themselves like a particle can turn into a wave and vice versa. Science makes up nonsense words like wavicle because they just don't really understand, what's going on there. And I think that it's the same thing with the UFO phenomenon. And some of the paranormal like qualities and the fuzzy edges to the science around it. It's not so much that it's paranormal as that we just need to expand our idea of what normal is. You have to remember that it was just a couple of centuries ago that science didn't even accept the idea that a rock could fall out of the sky. Meteors, people that saw meteors, they were considered kooks, tinfoil hat wearers. And now, of course, we know that rocks fall out of the sky. It's a part of the universe. And, it's just that we have not gotten to the point where we can understand it yet. Maybe we won't ever understand it. It may be that beyond us. But to me, it's just like quantum physics. It sounds like, the magic that Arthur C. Clarke talked about. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And it seems like magic to us, but it's just really high technology. That's just my opinion on the phenomenon, on teleportation. Why not?
Yeah, you're right.
Shane here.
Hi, Shane.
Go for it.
I was going to say too, whether it's the Apports or UFOs or other paranormal activity, we may not know what they are. We may not know the cause. We may not know even the effects. But at a minimum, we know that they are. And if they are and they exist, then certainly it's worth study. And again, whether they're related to each other or not, I don't think that's been proven. We could have separate standalone phenomena, or they could be related. But the point really is discussing it, researching it, trying to apply science to it. Those are very logical things and the thing that we should all be doing.
Yes.
That's right. You got to look at the weird stuff. That's where you start making advances, the stuff that doesn't make sense. You don't get anywhere by explaining stuff that makes sense.
Agreed upon. Yep.
Yeah, and I think speculation is A-okay. I just think it's important to say when you're speculating and when you've got some facts,
Precisely. I think it's one thing to we can put a hypothesis together and we can test the hypothesis to see if it's accurate. We can do the null hypothesis. We can do all of the wonderful things according to science. But what I see most often is immediate quantum leap jumps into something being, from someplace or whatever like that. Like we know that it's got I think I said this before, like there was a hubcap on the back end of it where it's got, it's got the license plate and it's telling us data reticuli, and we just don't see that. And just because something comes and pops in view and pops out of view doesn't mean that it dematerialized either, or that it necessarily did a jump to some other, hypothetically a jump to another place. There's a lot of things that can explain, that could be counter arguments that would account for that, and we just don't know. So yeah, we start off with a little bit of speculation, and we believe that this might be the case, but we look to try to like add science into it, and that's where that's what I'm trying to emphasize is that we need to do that. I've had so many people over 55 years that walk up to me and say, "Well, I see 100 UFOs a day," you know, or something of that nature. I had one woman who was declaring that she had an alien that was getting into her body and all this other stuff. And we were like, she was going on and talking about that. And it seemed to be more like a demonic kind of thing as opposed to a saucer thing. But, you know, it just, a lot of people wanted to speculate and say, well, it was UFO connected.
And
Oh.
Earl, actually, we were talking about that possibility regarding paranormal phenomena, how teleportation or apports may not be related to such a narrow topic, but actually it might be more correct to say that it also involves the paranormal area too. The aspect meaning poltergeist activity. Do you have any information on that to share, whether it's anecdotal or not, Earl?
Well, I know, I'm a member of Kathleen Martin and George Medick's experiencer research team with MUFON. And just in all, the many, many experiencer cases that I have closed, there are paranormal like aspects that are always there. Now, it may be like poltergeist type activity that happens to a person that, right after they've either been visited or taken, is very, very common. There was one case that Kathleen closed where they observed a gentleman who he would walk under the streetlights. This was a day after he had been abducted, and the streetlights would turn off as he would walk under them. As he would move past the streetlight, it would turn back on. And this was observed by, I believe it was both Kathleen and Denise Stoner observed this. I've had many, many people who have, the lights will turn off when they walk into a room, or it'll affect their iPhone, and this also happens.
Yep, Earl, you dropped off. I'll just jump in here. Earl, you back?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you dropped off again. Sorry about that.
Oh, I don't know what happened there. Well, yeah, anyway, we do see recurring, it's very, very common to see paranormal like events happen around an experiencer right after they've had contact with, non-earthly beings. That's just a thing. I mean, it's just over and over and over again. I hear it,
I'm
and
glad
that George Medic that you had mentioned is, and I can't remember if I think I got that from you, but Earl, on an earlier appearance, but that George Medic is the very same Doc Medic who used to pitch for the Yankees.
That is him.
That is extraordinary to me. And which brings up an interesting point, because Grant, I know you spend a lot of time following, it seems in particular musicians who have had these kinds of experiences. We don't get too much from pro athletes. Obviously, Doc Medic is heavily involved in this. There have been some others. The late Pete Maravich was a big-time UFO buff. We see Jose Canseco dipping his nose into this a little bit. Also, Aaron Rodgers had talked about a sighting that he had up in the Hudson Valley right before the NFL draft. Do you want to speculate a little bit on why we see so much from the artists, the musicians, and very little from the pro jocks? What's going on there? I know you're a hockey fan. What's up with that?
Well, to me, it's always right brain, left brain. I'm doing a book called Contact Modalities. So your musicians are right brained. It's like when they asked Roger Lear, who did the implants in the 17 implants, they asked him what are the two common things with all experiencers. He said, they're all creative people, and they're all right brain creative people, and all implants on the left side of the body. And in his book, he talked about the 250 implants with him and Sims on the left side of the body, which would indicate the left side of the body is run by the right brain, that whoever's putting the implants are not really interested in your rational analytical brain. They're interested in the right brain, the creative brain. You see a lot of experiencers are very good artists. You find a lot of musicians. I remember I was at Bubba Watson's, a friend of mine is golfs with Bubba Watson in Scottsdale. I was at the golf club there. They got me to do a lecture, and they were trying to block me. These guys were furious. You're not bringing this guy in. They had this Friday morning breakfast thing where they'd have a speaker, and nobody wanted the UFO guy there. And my friend had enough power; he got me in there. But anyway, I said, "Well, I'm going to find a golfer." And do you think I could find a golfer who even had a sighting? It was unbelievable. I couldn't find anything. And yet, if you take a musician and a UFO, the screen will light up. Or if you take musician and dreams, how many get songs in dreams? And we were talking about the scientific method. It came in a dream. You get all these sort of things when you get into creativity and this whole right brain, left brain thing, which I think is a big part of understanding how all this stuff works. That the very right brain creative people are more open to it. They don't block it, and that's where you get the experiences talking about the being. It's almost like John Wheeler said, the Nobel Prize winner that came up with the idea of black holes and wormholes, said it's a participatory universe. So you got to realize that a lot of what you see is being determined by you, that it's this whole idea that you interact with the world around you. And so if you're very right-brained, same as the remote viewing. I remember I got this idea, and that's when I went to Hal Puthoff, and I said, Hal, when you did the remote viewing, did you get the right brain, left brain thing going? And he said, read chapter 6. And I go, and it's like in one brain and out the other is chapter 6 of his book. And he talked about the fact that his wife picked this up, that remote viewing is very right-brained, that the people were getting the texture, the shape, the color right, but they were getting the location or the actual name of the event or the place, the size of it all wrong. That's all left brain, but all the right brain things they were very good at. And so back in the 1970s already, they knew this connection to the right brain. So what I say, it's the ability to shut down your left brain, your rational analytical brain, whether it's through hypnosis, regression, psychedelics, meditation, whatever, and open up. And musicians can open up. And so you get guys like, John Lennon, who had lights on his craft, and they weren't plasma type lights. They were big white lights that were flashing off and on, and a red light on top. And I always make the joke about John Lennon. I say, do you need big, huge, marquee light bulbs on the side of the craft to fly through time and space? It was quite evident. It was just something for him to see and to report. And he was close enough he could hit with a brick. He was that close to the object. So musicians, it's a big thing. And a lot of, you'll find a lot of right brain artists are involved, experiencers, piles of experiencers who suddenly get this thing where they're unbelievable painters. You get that very direct connection to this sort of thing about the female brain, the right brain, whatever you want to call it. And it's the ability to shut down the rational analytical brain, and you pop into this world of the paranormal.
Now, let's follow up with this a little bit and get your feedback as well. You've also got, once in a while, now and again, these very odd anecdotes from scientists, Kary Mullis, Nobel Prize winner, Jack Sarfati, Ramanujan, the mathematician, where they have these experiences that lead to these kinds of breakthroughs. And Chan had mentioned before, Einstein, wrote the foreword to the book by Upton Sinclair, Mental Radio, saying, don't overlook this stuff. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, you have. I wrote a book called Inspired: The Paranormal World of Creativity, and I look at all those different things. So I look at artists, I look at musicians. I look at 13 or 14 Nobel Prizes where you think, well, the rational analytical could figure this thing out. No, it's like when you quieten it down, like when you shut down the left brain. So when you get the laser, he's sitting on a park bench, and he'd done all the work, he'd put all the stuff in, and then suddenly he got this inspiration. The hologram came the same way. If you take a look at Gary Nolan talks about this creativity thing. He says, I don't know how it works. He says, but I know how to do it. He says, I go through all this stuff. I get it all ready. I ask all the questions, and I put it out, and I go to bed, and I wake up in the morning, it's in my head. And you hear this all the time. So when you go to bed, that's when your your left brain shuts down, and the left brain can go, or the right brain can go into the field and grab this material and come back. So that's my theory, is this sort of, you're able to dissociate to move into the field. So you have a lot of these things that link into this, and it involves a lot of top people, like Sarfati's story. You tell the story of Jack Sarfati, who said that he had got the phone call when he was 11 years old or whatever, that told him there was a computer on a flying saucer, and they had picked him and 400 people. And his mother tells him, you didn't have one phone call. You were on the phone all the time with this stupid thing, talking on the phone. And then 20 years later, they said, we're gonna link you up with the other people. And 20 years later is exactly when he meets Uri Geller, Ingo Swann, Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, and he gets involved with that whole crowd. And you start to get this idea that a lot of the stuff that you think people got by figuring it out, no, they didn't. I mean, piles and piles of stories of inventions and people getting downloads, or even the free survey. And I always go back to the free survey because it's a huge number of experiences that filled this out. 42% of all experiencers say at one point during their experience, at 42% say they got mathematical, technical, or scientific material in their head that they did not learn in school. When free first started, they had a physics committee. There was Edgar Mitchell. There was Rudy Shield. They had about 4 people on a physics committee that were looking at stuff that the experiencers were talking, advanced physics papers. And I had a woman show me one. It was a secretary showed me on her phone this paper that she'd written, and she had no scientific background. So you get that kind of stuff. Or the one that always blows me away, you say, oh, these anecdotal stories, these people are making this stuff up, these experiencers. 40% of all experiencers say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And you go like, nobody's going to make that up. If you're going to make up a story, that's not something you're going to put in the story, because it's the obvious thing is, well, how do you know there was not, number 6, 7, 8 on the other side of the universe that they forgot to tell you about? And I have my own download experience, and I know what they'll say. They'll say, I don't really know, but I just know for sure, because it comes with this absolute certainty. When you see these experiencers who are getting this material, I say you can give them lie detectors. You can do whatever you want, but at least listen to these people. They may have something that will actually advance things along. Maybe they actually did get a download. Maybe actually they did get some material. And it's like 42% say they got mathematical, technical, scientific material. 40% say they had the answer to everything in the universe during one point in their experience. I say that is a gold mine that it's almost like hacking the universe. If you can hack into this, if you can get some of this material these people have. And as I said, Free had an actual physics committee that was looking at this stuff that these people were bringing out. And I talked to Ray about it, and he didn't give me the details. There was 2 real big papers, one by a doctor and one by somebody else in Florida. And he said, well, they looked at it and they really didn't know, but it wasn't crazy stuff. They couldn't really determine whether it was useful or not, but it wasn't crazy stuff that people had made up. It actually did make sense in the physics world.
I mean, maybe there's something like an Akashic record that people can tap into. That's kind of what as a songwriter, I'm a songwriter, and we don't know where the songs come from. So we sort of have a presupposition that, songs all seem to be written already. And when you get a song, oftentimes it is like a download. And there seems to be like this perfect form of it. And you will tool around with it and work at it like a sculptor will work on a sculpture. But it's really what you're doing is as they say, you're chipping away everything that doesn't look like a horse, right? And it's the same thing with songs, and maybe that's the connection of what you were talking about with the right brain thing, and being able to shut the left. The left is the skeptical side, the side that says, "Oh, I can't do this, so I can't write like Bob Dylan." Bob Dylan is Bob Dylan, but Bob Dylan doesn't really know where his gift and his songs come from.
Well,
None of us do.
60 Minutes actually asked him, "Where did Blowing in the Wind come from?" And he went, I don't know, from that field of creativity, I guess. And you get that sort of stuff. And the other thing interesting about songwriters, and a lot of them get them in dreams. And the dream is completely unlike any other dream. So in your dream, it's all symbolic. It doesn't make any sense. There's all this weird stuff. But when a songwriter talks about a song that comes in a dream, there's no weird stuff. It's like they just basically, it's clear as a bell, and they can actually record it. And I even have the one story that I'm going to tell in Contact Modalities. And you can listen to this on National Public Radio interviewed this guy. This is a guy whose son dies at childbirth. He buries this, and he gets an entire symphony in his head. He has no musical background. He spends 20 years learning to play a guitar, learning to recreate this thing. And after 20 years, the London Philharmonic Orchestra plays. He has to gather £1 million to have this thing produced. And he had this song in his head for 20 years. And you get those kind of things. And he would say very clearly, you could see him working with a guy who was working on when they were scoring the thing, and he would say, no, it doesn't go like that. It goes, no. And he knew exactly every note, and he could remember those notes for 20 years. And when you look at that, that's when you say, this is where we can discover stuff. When you see these very bizarre, or like the savants, I looked a lot at savants, guys who can do these calculations in their head, that they can't button their shirt, but they can do calculations or remember 8,000 songs or give you a 15-digit prime number and stuff like that. That's where you look at these people and you start to realize we can learn something from these people. There's something going on here that tells us that something that we have right now that we believe is wrong. And if we can figure out what they're doing, we can advance science and the universe.
Or, and I just to jump in really quick, Grant, I have seen, I believe it was on 60 Minutes, where they've actually, there are people out there who suffer serious head injuries and develop extraordinary talents they didn't have before. It's funny, also, maybe a little bit of synchronicity when you talked about sculpting a horse. I'm telling you, this guy took a lump of clay and turned it into a reasonable facsimile of a horse faster than I can crack my knuckles. I was impressed.
Yeah. Yeah, it comes from, that's a dissociation. It comes from head injury or brain injury, or like dissociating through hypnosis or psychedelics and stuff like that, where you sort of do it. Or you take Diane Hennessy Powell, if you've ever interviewed her, she has these savant kids, and she had the one girl, Haley, who she did the experiment with that hit 162 numbers in a row right telepathically. And this girl would flip out. She couldn't talk. She had to use a touchpad. And that means that her left brain was shut down. She couldn't talk. She was totally, but in terms of telepathy, I mean, there's a couple of these people around, usually 10 or 11-year-old kids. And that when you start to teach them to do language, the telepathic ability goes away when you start to re-engage the left brain. And so that's where you can start to learn that there are people who can do this. Even 60 Minutes had the one with the memory. People say, oh, memory is not very good. It's you get these people, it's called, what's it called? Highly.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Where they can remember every event in their life from the time they were 10 years old, exactly what was on TV, what happened on that day, what day of the week it was, and stuff like that. And that happens with head injury as well. It's not just people who have this sort of naturally, it's people who have head injuries, and they can suddenly tell you everything. So that shows you that memory is perfect. It's like everything else. It's a matter of access. It's a matter of shutting things down rather than turning things on.
There's an individual regarding, I'll address a few topics you just mentioned, Grant. Thank you for talking about all that. There's an individual that had a head injury. What happened, I'll just tell the anecdotal story. He was at a bar, and for some reason he got targeted, and then he got beat up outside. His head hit some kind of surface like the asphalt or concrete of some kind. He ended up at the hospital, and multiple people were, jumping him. And then the end result was Jason Padgett. Yeah. He actually ended up becoming a math genius. Overnight, he was able to actually draw circles made up of increasingly many triangles, which he refers to as an illustration. I'll go ahead and include a link regarding that in a moment. But I think it's fascinating because he actually is one of the few people on the planet that can draw a perfect circle. Now, and that's based on the head injury situation. I also want to bring up something that will end up addressing the topic of children with with extraordinary abilities. I think China did a study on that. But I wanted to start off first talking about an individual that actually talks about the possibility of teleportation. His name is Dr. Eric Davis. And he received his PhD in astrophysics from the University of Arizona in '91. His fields of specialization include spacecraft exploration of the outer solar system, planetary sciences, relativity theory and cosmology, space mission engineering, NASA breakthrough propulsion physics. I'll include that link in a moment. I wanted to read a quote by him. It says, some researchers state that it is necessary to invoke a new physics which somehow unifies the human consciousness, i.e. physics of consciousness, with quantum and space-time physics in order to understand psychic teleportation and related PK phenomena. The researchers were amazed by the repeated results and were barely able to fathom the altered state of being that test specimens underwent during teleportation. Then he had another quote here I wanted to read. "It became known to myself, along with several colleagues, both inside and outside of government, that anomalous teleportation has been scientifically investigated and separately documented by the Department of Defense." I wanted to go on to talk a little bit about a paper published in the People's Republic of China in September of '81 in the journal Ziren Zazi, and it's a nature journal titled "Some Experiments on the Transfer of Objects Performed by Unusual Abilities of the Human Body," reported that gifted children were able to cause the teleportation of small physical objects from one place to another. Objects included watches, horseflies, other insects, radio, microtransmitters, photosensitive paper, and more. The participants never touched the objects beforehand. The experiments were done under both blind and double-blind conditions, and the researchers involved came from various colleges and sectors of the Department of Defense. This is an exceptional case because it was deemed necessary that an unclassified intelligence information report be prepared for public viewing. More research was done by the Aerospace Medicine Engineering Institute in Beijing in July of '90. It was published in the Chinese Journal of Somatic Science. This study reported several experiments involving high-speed photography videotaping, which was able to capture the transfer of test specimens like nuts, matches, nails, pills, and more through the walls of sealed paper envelopes, sealed glass bottles and tubes, sealed plastic film canisters, and more without the walls of any of these containers being breached. All of these experiments reported using gifted children and adults to cause the teleportation of various materials. I'm almost done. I just want to list off a few things. I'll go as fast as I can. Different research groups designed different experimental methods using gifted psychics, different sealed containers, and test specimens that were able to be teleported. Time required for teleportation of the test specimens through various barriers was anywhere from a fraction of a second to several minutes. It didn't matter which test specimen was used. I'll just go on to the last part. The high-speed photography videotaping records test specimens melding or blending with the walls of sealed containers and then simply disappear from the inside of the container only to reappear at another location. Okay, I had a question for everybody, and that is, if there are children that gifted that have the ability to never touch objects beforehand or touch them at all under double-blind conditions, and both blind and double-blind conditions in a scientific experiment, is it possible that some of these items that are being teleported, such as quarters, fish, frogs, anything at all, could possibly be from humans and not from aliens?
Well, I would like to see a little bit more. I would like to see some of that high-speed videotape. I'd obviously like to know a little bit more about it. My guess is that I know we have, because we had Uri Geller over here. We've tried that kind of thing here. I would say that I am really skeptical. I would like to see that videotape.
I can make a comment on that. Hal Puthoff, I believe, was watching those kids. My friend Bob Emenegger did UFOs Past, Present, Future, was actually going to go to China to investigate this story with his co-producer Bob Sandler, and Bob's wife wouldn't let him go, but they were going to actually go and reinvestigate this story. And I'm not 100% sure, but I think Hal was the one that put him onto this, and with some of these reports, and I guess the CIA was watching these kids. That's the one thing. The other one is, you mentioned Eric Davis. You got to remember that Eric Davis had a very dramatic UFO sighting at his graduation when he was graduating with his PhD, and that the report was that when they were at Skinwalker Ranch, there was a lot of people like George Knapp and people like that, John Alexander, who didn't have anything happen, and a lot of the stuff was happening around Eric Davis, which gives you this whole idea that you may need an experiencer to get the phenomena to materialize.
And I know Kit Green has been over there and done a little bit of work with the Chinese in recent years as well.
Yeah, and they would watch these kids. That's the whole point, is that it may be black ops where they're watching them secretly But when that kind of stuff is gone on, you'd be crazy if you were an intelligence agency if you didn't go and try to investigate these kids and figure out what is going on, because that's why we did remote viewing. The only reason we did remote viewing is because we learned that the Russians were doing it. And we realized that, okay, you can be very skeptical and say, I don't believe this is going on. But if you happen to be wrong and the Russians are right and they get the technology, it's game over. Whoever has this kind of technology will rule the world. And so it doesn't really matter whether you believe in the technology or not. If somebody's claiming to have this kind of stuff, you have to investigate it. You have no choice.
True. Very well put.
I wanted to bring up an interesting situation that occurred to Uri, and that was he had a teleportation incident that occurred to him. And we had the opportunity to actually interview him recently. Frank and I did. And it was a fascinating story. I guess he was on a journey I think he was just jogging, and he ended up actually, and Frank, you'll have to tell me how to pronounce
Yeah, he was just walking
Go
around.
ahead.
I believe he was just walking around near his place in Manhattan. And
Right.
he ended up, I think it was like 35 miles away at the home of his sort of mentor, at least here in North America, Andrea Puharich.
Thank you. And I have a story about that I wanted to share with everybody. And this is actually kind of a bombshell because I don't believe that Uri even knows about this. I did contact Uri, by the way, and to talk about this with him. And I actually did on short notice because, as you know, well, anyway, I just wanted to mention I did reach out to him, but I have not had the opportunity to hear back from him. He's in a totally different time zone. So I got an email from somebody, and they said, well, watching your UFON interview with Uri, he spoke of being taken from a New York City street and transported to, Frank, can you pronounce his name? I can't pronounce it.
Puharich, yeah.
Yes, thank you. His house. Many years ago, I was talking with an individual. I can't say who it was. They do say who it is in the email, by the way. She was at Andrea's house, sitting with others outside on a patio covered with lattice work. And they had just been talking by phone with Uri and asked him to come visit them at Andrea's house north of New York City in Ossining, New York. Suddenly, Uri fell down through the overhead lattice work on the patio. Everyone was stunned as they believed they had been talking with him a short time before and believed him to be in New York City at the time. This is just a corroboration of his statement, and that email came to me on 4/24 of this year, right after the show.
Let me tell you, did you? I don't know if you asked him about the egg story. I mean, I took a lot of.
Yeah, you're talking about the John Lennon story?
Yeah, well, and what happened after it?
Yes, he did.
I took a lot of flack when I posted that as well, because there's a lot of people, you either like Uri or you like Uri. And
Right.
the story is that he was friends with John Lennon, and that John Lennon had a second sighting in which he's at the second time he's with Yoko Ono. He tries to wake Yoko up. It's this classic abduction story. Tries to wake her up. He can't wake her up. There's light coming from under the door. He opens the door, and there's these, he calls them effing bug people were standing there. He tries to push them back, and they sort of, with their mind, they sort of move him back. He wakes up in the morning. He's on top of the covers. Yoko Ono's awake. He's got this egg thing in his hand. And a lot of people have said, oh, he faked this thing. It's a magician's thing, and he's making this whole thing up. So over the years, he's had this thing that he was given to him by John Lennon, that John Lennon met him at a restaurant and said, this may be my ticket to another planet, but I don't want it. You can have it. He gives it to Uri Geller. And about a year later, he's assassinated. So Uri's had this thing with him. So my friend Sid Goldberg from Gaia is over in Israel, and he said, what do you want me to ask Uri? And I said, well, ask him about the egg. Get him to show you the bronze egg. So he asks Uri, and Uri says, okay, I'll bring it tomorrow. And so Sid takes a picture of him holding this egg, and he sends it to me, and he says, this is for you. So I send an email back to Sid Goldberg, and I say, good boy, maybe this is your ticket to another planet. And as this email is arriving in Israel, he's having dinner with Uri Geller. So he's explaining to Uri Geller who I am and this question about the egg and all this sort of stuff. And then he says, oh, look, an email has just come in from Grant, and he reads it. And my email says, good boy, because he shows me this egg. I says, good boy, maybe this is your ticket to another planet. and then Uri Yuri says, "Oh, good." And then as that happens, Imagine starts to play on the radio in the restaurant. And Yuri says, "Listen, listen, Imagine's playing." And he says, "Look, my hair's standing up on my arms." And people say, "Oh, Yuri's a fake." And I said, well, did he actually fake the music too? Because that was something where when it's one thing when you hear other people tell the story. It's another thing when it happens to you. It was pretty bizarre.
Okay, so Grant, how do you feel about the possibility, just to backtrack, regarding my question, which I think is completely valid, that it may not necessarily be a consciousness that is ET related, but the possibility of human related teleportation regarding objects that people are witnessing? Is that a possibility? How do you feel about that?
Well, it's always going to be internal. There is only, if you get into the whole, oneness thing, it's all one thing. It's all inside your head. There's no out there. Everything that happens in your mind. So yes, it's like the ions experiment. If you saw the ions experiment where they're doing the double split experiment where they're using people to use their mind to interfere with the quantum wave, and they get this very direct sort of influence where people can actually influence these quantum waves that are turning into particles. And the guy that was the top guy was this yoga guy that had really, really high hit rate. And he said to him, so did you go into the other room with your mind and do that? And he said, no, I just went within myself. And that's the whole thing. Yeah, it's all going to be mind. It's all going to be us. It's almost like John Alexander said, what if it's true that they are us and we are them? It's the whole idea that if it's all linked together, it's like telepathy. It's not a signal that's going between one person and another. It's all one thing. You're all in the same field, and all you're doing is going into the field and reading the field. It's all one thing. There is no separation. I think that's one of the main things I'm starting to believe now. There's no separation. It's all one thing. And when you believe that, that's the whole idea. How did they get here? It's all one thing. There is no real time and space, and that quantum physics starts to show that may be an illusion, that it's all one thing, and that's how you can move from one place to another. You have to understand this principle of oneness, that it's all one thing. So yes, we are definitely influencing what's happening around us, and whether we're doing it or an outside force, I still think it's all going to be one thing. It's all happening in the same the same field.
All right, thank you for your answer. We're going to move on to something else, but before I leave that topic, I just wanted to mention that it kind of sounds a little bit like that book, The Tao of Physics, to me, regarding what you just said. And one excerpt from The Tao of Physics summarizes the author Capra's motivation for writing that book, and that was, science does not need mysticism, and mysticism does not need science, but man needs both. I'm not saying that what you said is mysticism related, all of it in its entirety, but it does sound a little bit similar to that book to me. Now, there's an interesting article that Paul Dean, a researcher, also a young gun, wrote recently, and he gave me the information to go ahead and share with us on the show, and that is he wrote it in this manner. He said, shock, multi-sensor UFO tracking network in Vietnam, and here is the final bombshell. These UFOs, or whatever they were, may have caused a missile strike on Australia's HMAS Hobart ship by the USAF. In 2016, Paul Dean stumbled onto numerous Vietnam War-era U.S. Air Force, U.S. Marine Corps, U.S. Army, and U.S. Navy documents relating to the unidentifiable helicopters, phantom helicopters, unknown objects, unidentified flying objects, and UFOs. Importantly, these airborne entities were considered or treated as distinct from mere enemy helicopters or enemy aircraft. The records initially were mostly U.S. Army records like history and chronologies, mission reports, patrol logs, briefs, daily staff journals, and so-called lessons learned publications. These gave way to much more alarming to U.S. Air Force records, though, as we shall see. Some of his first finds were still significant. For example, he says he has the 23rd Infantry Division daily journal entry dated the 6th of January, 1969, which says, I guess there's objects flying into their area about 700 millimeter, I'm not sure what he means, but M in front of them, AZ 310 degrees, thank you, meters, yes, thanks. This email, by the way, there's no spaces in it, so I have to separate the words. Objects came in slow over the ASP and landed. When object moves, it has a glowing light. It is about 15 to 20 feet across. It is shaped like a big egg. Control TWR reports their radar.
Tower.
Thank you. Did not pick anything up. Object also does not seem to have any sound to it when it moves. Now, I could go on and on because this is a very, very long report, but I just wanted to read another excerpt. Another document, although this is one to researchers of old, wasn't my discovery, namely a U.S. Army counterintelligence spot report sent from the 524th Military Intelligence Detachment, Saigon states. I observed 5 large illuminated oval-shaped objects traveling in close formation at a very high rate of speed across the sky. It was apparent that they were not any form of conventional aircraft due to their size, shape, rate of speed, and the fact they made no noise audible to me. Prior to the sighting of these objects, I had been observing conventional aircraft, both propeller and jet-powered, and there's no question in my mind they were a great deal larger than any craft I had ever seen in the sky. What I was going to ask my panels, did you get an opportunity to review that paper that Paul Dean had presented to me to present to you? Anyone?
I have not read it.
Yeah, not yet. I think you were talking to Paul the other day. He just flipped it to you. But
yeah,
he's going to come out with that.
And, a little bit.
Looks like good stuff.
What did you think?
Okay. I've heard about it before. I've heard about the phenomenon, and I've actually talked with one gentleman who was at the Tet Offensive. He was a driver for generals during the Vietnam War, so he was, but he had heard about that they called them North Vietnamese helicopters, and there was no such thing. The North Vietnamese did not have helicopters, but it was there were a lot of sightings in Vietnam. You have to wonder why.
Yeah, there's going to be a link, I think, to the military. I think they're not too happy with what's going on with the military. I'll give you an example of a weird story that happened to me. It's a Japanese reporter. Her name is escaping me now. She allowed me to use a photograph in one of my books. This happened to a Marine who went into Nagasaki, Marine guy, days after the bomb there, and was basically photographing the damage. And it wasn't until 1997 they're going through his photographs, and she's looking at these photographs and sees all these UFOs in the photograph. So I got one of the better ones, and I put it in my book. And the agreement he had was they weren't allowed to use it until he died. I think he died in 2001. But you have this clear as day in the daylight, this UFO right over Nagasaki a couple days after the detonation of the bomb. So I think they would be watching this kind of stuff, because if it's a oneness universe, it's like if you got your little 50 feet along the river and you're dumping your toxin in the river, it affects everybody else. And that it seems that they're the modern UFO era. There may be UFOs, but there was no UFOs like starting when we detonated the atomic bomb. And I think that's a big part of what this is all about. Even with the cattle mutilations, we look at David Perkins, who is one of the top cattle mutilation guys. He said if you take a look at the cancer rates in the Western United States, the high areas, and you take a look at the cattle mutilation areas, they fit like a glove, one on top of another. And he says all cattle mutilations, according to him, were happening downwind and downstream from nuclear activities. So you have these connections that would link them in with the nuclear silos and stuff. And I had a woman that actually took me to a silo in North Dakota that's still operational and told me quite clearly, her and 2 other girls saw this thing, and she said it came out of that metal thing. And I said, are you sure? Yeah, came out of the metal thing. And it was, it was swirling. And here's a girl who was able to predict things and experience her and stuff. She was whatever this is when it started, but you have a very direct connection to nuclear weapons, almost like we're about to contaminate the universe. And they're here, the kids have got the matches. And even the Canadian government talked about this, the fact that they were very upset about the nuclear situation, and that the only time they would ever step in is if there was a nuclear exchange. Otherwise, they would allow the human race to stew in its own juices.
Wow.
Thank you for that information, Grant. I just want to let everybody know. that if they want to read more about that, I just included the links to the information regarding Paul Dean's research. He is a great researcher. I think his website is UFOs Documenting the Evidence. You can just go in the chat room and see it right there. I really appreciate everybody having come on the panel today. I just want to know if anybody has any last things to say at all regarding the show today.
I had a great time.
Fantastic. Yeah. Good.
Wonderful group.
Yeah, awesome stuff.
Honored
Yeah,
to be part of.
very useful.
I'm really glad that we don't agree on stuff because it just makes it so much better. I think somebody was very politely saying earlier that they noticed that there was a disagreement between Grant and Rich. I hope there is, not just because I'm not saying like the particular people. I mean that anybody on our panels, I hope they do disagree because it adds to a lively debate and we want to hear everybody's perspectives. And I don't think anybody won at a debate today. I don't think it was about that. I think it was just about everybody having the opportunity to share what they thought about the topics that we cover today. Grant, also wanted to thank you very much for taking the time, been very generous with your time. I know you're extremely busy. Everybody else is extremely busy with their research and everything they're involved in. And also wanted to give information about a really wonderful individual who was on the show with us, didn't get to say very much, but that is Michael Hall. He's also known as a paranormal lawyer, and he has a wonderful background. He founded and directed the UFO I-Team, and that is an experienced group of highly educated UFO paranormal and field investigators who travel to anomalous hotspots around the world by plane, train, bus, and local ride-sharing services to investigate UFO, Bigfoot, ghosts, and other strange paranormal activity. And he's just a wonderful person all around. And also wanted to let everybody know a little bit about Dr. Irena Scott. She has a wonderful book out there. Irena, can you please let us know the latest book that you just came out with?
Dr. Scott, you still with us?
I don't know if she's still, I can say it for us. It is Sacred Quarters, Secrets Behind the Real Project Blue Book, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Roswell, Battelle, Memory, Medal, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and UFO Cover-Ups and UFOs Today. Those are two different books. Dr. J. Allen Hynek and UFO Cover-Ups and UFOs Today is the second book I just mentioned there. We had Rich Hoffman on today at the SCU, the Scientific Coalition of Ufology, a really fantastic person who's great at debate.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Liven the show up.
I just want to clarify that I think the world of what Grant's doing. I mean, I respect him as an individual and what he's doing. So I mean, if there's if we're not counter to each other, it's just like we just have different opinions about certain things. So I respect.
We need this. So we need this. We need to bring individual skills and do our own thing and come together and shoot the breeze. And this is what the field needs a lot more of.
Yeah, it is about arguing, different perspectives and stuff like that. And I think we need to do more of that. I agree with you. I think collaboration is very important and discussion is important. And what's sad for me is to not see that it's being done civilly. I mean, meaning that you get a lot of people that just are really, really negative about others and stuff. And that's sad for me individually, because I think we can all have our opinions and look at our perspectives and gain something from that opinion and their investigations. And so I think
it gets a little soap opera sometimes, and you have to deal with it and hopefully move on.
Yeah, by all means.
Thank you very much. And I also wanted to mention Earl Grey, who's the chief investigator for the Southern California chapter of MUFON. I also wanted to say earlier that Earl is involved in music. Earl, can you give us a little bit of background on that music, just a tiny little blurb of it?
Sure. Well, that was my first passion in life, really. I started playing guitar when I was 12 years old. I couldn't really play other people's songs at first, so I had to write my own, and that's how I became a songwriter. And heck if I know where songs come from. They come from the same place that, I guess they kind of teleport to us.
Right.
They probably already existed. That's the way it always feels. I mean, and I've been doing this for many years. I do have 3 CDs out there. You can listen to me on Spotify. I was half of the acoustic duo Piper Gray. We have an album called Apples that I'm very proud of. And I do a lot of studio work for other people, and my wife and I do harmony vocals, have done harmony vocals for a lot of different people's CDs, and it keeps me busy, that's for sure. Between that and UFOs, there's not a whole lot of time left.
Fantastic. And also we had wonderful Shane Hurd on today, who's a field investigator for Phoenix MUFON. And also wanted to mention my co-host, Frank Stalter. And Frank, can you just tell a little bit about yourself regarding your biography, just a short blip on how you connected with ufology and what you've done regarding that, your research?
Yeah, well, I've got the website. That's where it all started. Got seriously interested, actively, publicly. That's when I sort of became a public figure in terms of UFOs, and that was roughly 10 years ago, so roughly a decade. Just really got into it and thought I'd take a closer look after a appearance by Edgar Mitchell at the National Press Club. That's what got me starting to look, and found stuff out and stayed with it the rest of the way.
Great, thank you. And we also had Jeff Krause on earlier, and he had to leave us a little early, but it was wonderful having him on today. He's the state director for MUFON for Southern California. So really appreciate everybody's time, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their weekend. Thank you for
Have a
having
good
been
one,
on
everybody.
the Chant Hannah show today.
Thanks
I appreciate
again.
it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
And